On the front line, the main focus remains on the Pokrovsk direction. The Russian offensive there has temporarily slowed down, but not for long. This was reported today by the American Institute for the Study of War. Russian forces are not trying to entrench themselves in Pokrovsk, but continue their assault, aiming to break through to the northern part of the city. At the same time, Ukrainian units have partially restored logistics routes north of Pokrovsk, analysts from the Institute write, and have managed to deliver ammunition. Before the broadcast, I spoke on the phone with Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky, and I will tell you what he had to say about this in a few minutes. Today, you and I can help the 428th Shadow Battalion of Unmanned Systems, which is currently stationed in the Pokrovsk sector. The soldiers need transport, which is absolutely essential. So every 10, 20 or 100 hryvnias we donate using this QR code is a chance to save a life. Thank you. And right now, here is a report from TSN.Tyzhden correspondent Alexander Zahorodny from near Pokrovsk, who drove right up to the positions of the Muscovites and saw firsthand the real situation in which our guys are fighting.
Pokrovsk district we're entering. What is the scariest thing for journalists at the front? No, not the shelling. The scariest thing is when you're near the front line and you don't know the road. You're not sure you're not driving straight into enemy positions. Dozens of burned out cars on the road, shattered houses. We're next to Kucheryavy Yar, where fierce fighting was still raging until very recently. It's not even kilometers to the enemy positions anymore, just hundreds of meters. The meeting with these fighters from the renowned 25th Airborne Syczeslaw Brigade is heartfelt. Now they're a TV host and a producer, but until recently they were TSN cameramen Ivan Holovach and Alexander Rebenchuk. Each of them has filmed hundreds of reports from the front lines. Now they themselves are defending this country with weapons in their hands. The work begins at dusk. The fighters quickly assemble the bombers. These are powerful quadcopters. We call them vampires. The enemy calls them Baba Yaga. A fighter with the call sign Krim is testing a new device. Just a few hours ago, he received an award from the president's hands. Congratulations to you. Do you have an award? Thank you. What did they give you? They awarded me the Order of Courage, 3rd class. And what about some leave, no? Not the right time for a vacation? It's still not the right time for a vacation. And here near Pokrovsk, there really is no time to rest right now. The commander with the call sign Burzui is urging his guys on. The vampires should already be at the front line. The situation at the front is tough.
People are currently working at full capacity, carrying out their assigned tasks and responsibilities directly in Pokrovsk and beyond. Myrnohrad, Pokrovsk, and our other positions that are still holding on are standing firm, holding our land. Positions. Basically, there aren't any as such, but groups do slip through, they move, and they are destroyed.
This is how the commander describes the situation in Pokrovsk. The enemy is infiltrating the city in small groups. They do not engage in combat with Ukrainian units. Their main objective is to get into our rear and establish themselves there. It turns out to be something like a layered pie. The enemy is in the rear of our forces, but our troops are also in the enemy's rear. Ammunition, fuel, and food can only be delivered to the outskirts. Only at night, and with great risk. After that, the bombers get to work. These devices will be flying all night. They won't be bombing enemy positions. They will be saving our soldiers right in Pokrovsk. The first flight is for gasoline. Fuel means a generator, it means charging for radios, it means communication.
Some things will break, some won't. We drop it onto the net and then we'll see how it goes. Here's gasoline for the generator so the guys can charge their batteries. Starlink, so there's always a connection.
The enemy roughly knows where our positions are and constantly turns on jammers. It's already the operator's skill to get his bird out of the enemy air defense zone and return to base. The next run is for food supplies. The guys have run out of food. What, even send them potatoes, right?
Of course.
So what, maybe some canned meat? Do you want potatoes?
They don't want canned meat. Potatoes. There's sausage too. Do you think you can live on just canned meat? Sausage, Snickers, bread, tea, sugar, energy drinks, that's what they order.
The enemy also knows the approximate location from where the vampires are launched and tries by all means to destroy them. The nearby explosions make the cameraman a bit nervous. At almost every Ukrainian position now, you can see something like this contraption. 2 sticks and a bit of foam plastic. This is the Russian drone Molnia. Well, it causes quite a bit of trouble for Ukrainian soldiers, although it's hard to call it purely Russian because every circuit board is labeled in Latin letters. A soldier with the call sign Frenchman emerges from the fog on his peculiar Cossack and within an hour takes us to the mainland, where enemy shells can no longer reach. But enemy rockets can still reach here. And now this is Dnipropetrovsk region. The front line is dozens of kilometers away, but the Russians can reach here, and they do. They hit this strategic facility, or to be more precise, a strategic store. There used to be a small complex here. People sold, well, soft drinks. The local women talk about the tragedy that happened here with surprising calm. Who survived?
A 65-year-old woman. And the owner, they said, lost an arm and a leg, and the 5-year-old girl's too. Either a leg or something else was torn off as well.
This is my face, sent from the ground drone's camera to the operator's laptop. This is the final test of the Termit ground drone before its first mission to the Chasiv Yar area. There, the soldiers of the 24th Brigade are holding the line. It's the first outing. You could say, today it was taken out of the box, today it was assembled, and today it will make a short trip. It will deliver supplies to the guys. Fuel, water, food. Cars no longer go there. Termits don't last long at the front. They only survive a handful of missions. But they carry hundreds of kilograms of cargo. That same flying vampire can only carry 15. If this tracked vehicle makes it to the front line, our soldiers will definitely be able to hold out there for a few more weeks. Here, in the area of Kostiantynivka, we are working with Ole Petrashuk, the press officer of the 24th Brigade. Foreign media are writing about him now. It was Ole who managed to shoot down an enemy FPV drone in Kostiantynivka when it was already coming in for an attack. Ole protected himself and the foreign journalist, getting her out of there safe and sound.
This has been a very difficult month for the press working at the front. 2 journalists have been killed and 6 more wounded. That's why we shouldn't forget that the work journalists do is a small bridge between us and our rear, helping us to understand each other.
For Ole, shooting down enemy drones is nothing new. Here's a shot of him blowing up a Pochekan drone on the road right in the middle of the street. He saw it, blew it up, and moved on. But he doesn't really want to talk about it. He says the soldiers on the front line are doing much more than he is. Still, we thank this young man. With him here, near Kostiantynivka, it somehow feels calmer. We came here to thank you. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you. Nets. Continuous tunnels of nets. The Donetsk region is already wrapped in them. The roads of Dnipropetrovsk region are being covered with nets too. Dozens of brigades are working in all directions nearby. But even these builders don't know for sure if the net will save them from an enemy strike.
At least it stops a drone from a direct hit. At least some hope to survive. 4.
This brigade, the daily quota is to cover a kilometer of road with netting. In the near future, all the main highways leading to Donetsk region will look like this. But will this solve the problem? Will the net protect against an enemy drone? These guys say that at the very least, it will increase the chances of survival. We know that in order to completely solve the drone problem, we need to destroy those who launch these drones, or at least drive them out of our land. Alexander Zahorodnik, Oleksiy Osovchuk, TSN Week 1.51, United Marathon.
And it was right here in Dnipropetrovsk region that a tragedy occurred which should never have happened, if only because we have already learned painful lessons. And there is a direct order from the Commander-in-Chief prohibiting any ceremonies near the front line. On November 1st, the commander of one of the battalions gathered the soldiers for an award ceremony. 19 people were killed by a strike from ballistic missiles and drones. This week, the State Bureau of Investigation brought charges against this commander. And on Saturday, the district court of the city of Dnipro placed him in custody. He faces imprisonment for a term of 5 to 8 years. Among the dead were soldiers from the 35th Separate Marine Brigade. The brother of our colleague, TSN journalist Dmytro Sviatnenko Volodymyr, was probably a healer. And the photographer for the publication Ukrainer, Kostiantin Huzenko, this week they were bid farewell on the Maidan. But how many more such tragedies could there be? Why is the clear ban on these risky award ceremonies from the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine not working? Where is the system failing? And how can we put an end to such disregard for the lives of our defenders? I asked General Alexander Syrsky about this in a brief phone conversation before the broadcast. He expressed that, out of empathy for the families, he told them about a serious internal investigation that is ongoing in parallel with the SBI case. The problem is not only that the ban on ceremonies at the front was violated, the commander-in-chief said. Once again, there was a group chat on social media, and this is a disregard for basic safety rules. Because it was by hacking the networks that the Russians most likely found out about the gathering, Syrsky believes. In recent days, this tragedy was discussed with the corps commanders, and the commander-in-chief hopes that disciplinary measures will reduce such incidents to zero. The chances of exposing ourselves to the enemy again. Of course, I also asked about Pokrovsk. Has the Russian offensive really slowed down temporarily? How does the commander-in-chief himself assess the situation there? And since it makes no sense to discuss the entire strategy of whether to retreat or not, or to surrender territory to the enemy live on air, I phrased the question this way. Does our command have a plan B, or maybe even a plan C to save the situation? Pokrovsk is a continuous fortified area, said the commander-in-chief. Yes, there are a few places where the Russians managed to get through the engineering barriers, but the command knows exactly where those spots are. And that's why the situation is under control, says Syrsky. Of course, there is both a plan B and a plan C for all possible developments, I quote the commander-in-chief. But the intensity of enemy attacks has really decreased, he says. That doesn't mean they want to capture Pokrovsk any less. Right now, the Russians have gathered 50,000 bayonets there, but they know that since October, they've lost a similar number, about 30,000 Muscovites. Moreover, the 425th Assault Regiment has been deployed to Pokrovsk, which, according to Syrsky, is operating very effectively. Syrsky himself, who is also almost constantly near Pokrovsk, assesses the situation 3 times a day. According to him, the logistical routes have been restored and reoriented, with the weather lending a hand. And at present, there are all the forces and means necessary to confidently say that there is no reason for panic, the commander-in-chief emphasized. Well, in this situation, we can help too, so let's keep donating. Let the gratitude of our heroes motivate you. We have a report on what has been accomplished from the 159th Brigade, and our soldiers already have the much-needed transport. Thank you to the viewers of TSN Week.
The servicemen of the 159th Mechanized Brigade expressed their sincere gratitude to the viewers of TSN Week and to Alla Mazur. Thanks to them, it became possible to purchase 2 ATVs, which are extremely important for the logistical support of electronic warfare operations. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
This week, we also received an important signal of support from Europe. The European Commission published a positive report on our progress toward EU membership, recognizing achievements in the area of the rule of law, the fight against corruption and the protection of minority rights. And this is the best assessment in the past 3 years. The document paves the way for further accession negotiations. And despite Hungary's blocking efforts, unexpected ideas to bypass the veto are already being discussed in Brussels so as not to halt Ukraine's progress. And this is truly important news that strengthens our footing amid the almost tectonic shifts currently shaking the United States, our main strategic ally. What is happening there? And how might it affect the situation in Ukraine? TSN's own correspondent in the United States, Olha Koshelenko, will tell us more.
This week, the United States set a new personal record. Today marks the 40th day of the government shutdown. The previous one during Trump's first term ended at 35 days. But this time things have gone too far. Republicans cannot pass the federal budget without Democratic votes, but they want to cut the Medicaid program, which is sacred to them, for the poor. Neither side is willing to compromise. As a result, the government is only partially functioning, only essential employees are going to work, but they still aren't getting paid. The consequences are already being felt not just by government employees. The funds for the food assistance program for the poor, which serves 40 million Americans, have run out. Air traffic controllers who were already overworked due to staff shortages can't handle it anymore. Hundreds of flights across the country have been cancelled or delayed. But those who are lucky enough to fly board their planes thinking that the controller hasn't been paid for a month is exhausted and angry. This doesn't directly affect Ukraine, since we no longer receive funding from the American budget. But Americans have started to lose faith in their government. This week, some states held local elections, and the Republicans lost completely. Trump wrote on Truth Social that it was because he wasn't on the ballot. It's unclear how comforting this explanation is to his fellow party members, who in exactly 1 year will be running in the midterm elections for Congress. But for the sake of self-preservation, the government will have to become more popular, meaning they'll have to look for their voters. And here's what they think, for example, about the war in Ukraine. The October survey by the Vandenberg coalition was conducted among the core of Trump's voters, meaning those who are by default loyal to the president. The following became clear. Voters want the war in Ukraine to end. 46% believe that tougher measures are needed against Putin, tariffs, sanctions, and other forms of pressure. 76% support the sanctions imposed last month against Rosneft and Lukoil. 72% think that Ukraine should be supported more. In particular, to share intelligence data, provide Tomahawk missiles, and allow strikes deep inside Russia. After the sanctions were imposed against Rosneft and Lukoil, Trump generally seems to be trying to distance himself from the topic of the war in Ukraine, which has not brought him quick or positive results. At first, he advised waiting 6 months for the effects of the oil sanctions, but now he says they are already evident.
I can say that exports from Russia have significantly decreased. We just want to see the war end. So many people have been killed. Many Russian soldiers have been killed, so I think at some point they will wise up and do it. So yes, Russian exports have dropped significantly.
Meanwhile, Trump and Putin are playing a game of nuclear blackmail together, but no one really wants to do it for real. At first, Putin was boasting about his Burevestniks and Poseidons. Trump, unlike Biden, who took every hint of nuclear war seriously, responded with a counter-escalation and announced that he would also conduct nuclear tests. Experts became interested in what exactly also meant. After all, neither Russia nor China has tested nuclear weapons in the last 30 years. Contrary to other American officials, Trump insists that no, competitors are conducting secret tests.
Russia is testing and China is testing, but they don't talk about it. You know, we are an open society, we are different, we talk about it. We have to talk about it, because otherwise you'll start writing about it. They don't have reporters who would write about it. We do.
In response, Putin held a meeting of the country's Security Council in the style of a provincial surf theater from the Russian hinterland. The topic of the meeting was transportation security, but the Speaker of the State Duma, Volodin, boldly interrupts Putin and spontaneously proposes to discuss nuclear tests in response to similar statements from the Americans. And the Minister of Defense Belousov just happens to have a report on this topic with him, even though, as a reminder, he was supposed to attend a meeting about transportation security. By the way, no one mentioned transportation again.
I consider it appropriate to begin preparations for large-scale nuclear tests immediately.
The outcome is basically nothing. Putin instructed to study the feasibility of the issue, but observers' attention is drawn to something else. There is no foreign minister among the members of the Russian Security Council. Sergei Lavrov, according to the Financial Times, fell out of favor after he ruined a conversation with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He spoke on the phone in such a way that the American secretary reported to Trump that it was not possible to meet with Putin at this time. There's no point.
Officials were struck by Lavrov's stubbornness. Lavrov is openly tired and it seems believes he has more important things to do than to meet and interact with the United States, regardless of what President Putin wants, said a source familiar with the situation.
According to the media, the Kremlin did not instruct Lavrov to do this. The minister has disappeared. He won't even attend the G20 summit later this month. Whether Putin intends to remove the man who has led Russian diplomacy for more than 2 decades or has simply hidden the minister temporarily to send a signal to the Americans remains unknown. But this week, the role of Russian negotiator was played by a completely different actor. Actually, a meeting between Putin and Trump in Budapest would have suited Viktor Orban much better. But since the Russians ruined everything, he went to Washington himself. The thing is, there will be elections in Hungary next March. The opposition party TSN is slightly ahead of the ruling Fidesz, and he needs some PR. Trump welcomed his friend at the highest level. He greeted him on the steps of the West Wing, and during the working lunch, instead of seating him across the table as protocol dictates, he sat him right next to himself. From this angle, the cameras had a clear view of how, throughout the entire public part of the event, Orban kept his hand in an as-yet empty plate. The US president says directly that the leader of Hungary is so outstanding that he must win next year's election. And he gives him a truly valuable gift, a 1-year exemption from sanctions on Russian oil and gas. No one else in the world is allowed to buy it, only Orban and...
We are considering this because it is difficult for him to get oil and gas from other places. It's a wonderful country, a great country, but they have no sea, no ports, and so they have a difficult problem. And if you look at what's happening in Europe, many countries there don't have such problems, and they buy a lot of oil and gas from Russia. As they know, this really worries me, because we are helping them, and yet they are buying oil and gas from Russia. So this issue could perhaps be considered more carefully.
Orban says he also wants to discuss the war with Trump. Supposedly, only the two of them truly stand for peace. And the entire European Union mistakenly believes that Ukraine can win?
The only government that stands for peace is the government of the United States and Little Hungary in Europe. Everyone else wants to continue the war because many of them believe that Ukraine can win on the battlefield, which is a misunderstanding of the situation. So it's a complicated issue, and we will discuss it.
So you're saying that Ukraine cannot win this war?
Miracles do happen.
What message from Putin Orban conveyed to Trump after the press left remains a mystery. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that nothing agreed upon without Ukraine will matter.
He will tell him that Putin wants to end the war because the Prime Minister's rhetoric is no different from the Russian one. He will say that Ukraine is losing the war because his rhetoric is no different from the Russian one. It's like, I would say, a live mail service from Russia to the United States.
However, the obvious crisis of Russian diplomacy cannot help but be pleasing, as long as it is represented by people like Lavrov, who is no longer able to hide his arrogance at international negotiations, or his opposite, Dmitriev. Just by appearing on American TV channels, he irritated the Trump administration. There is hope. From Washington, United States, Olha Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN Week, 1+1, Marathon, United News. And all this Western diplomacy ultimately turns out to be directly dependent on Ukrainian direct action sanctions. And this week they have achieved 90% effectiveness because 90% of Ukrainian drones hit their targets. And the response to Putin's attempts to cause us a blackout has now been felt not only in Belgorod and Voronezh, but also in the Moscow region. TSN.Tyzhden correspondent Oksana Radionova has put together all the pieces of our strikes and says it seems we're getting close to switching off Moscow itself.
This is how spectacularly a Shahed warehouse detonated this week at the Donetsk airfield. The result is impressive. Now, more than 1,000 Russian Geran 2 drones will not be coming our way. With missiles and drones, our defenders also destroyed 1,500 explosive devices for these UAVs and the camouflaged infrastructure.
Those were actually bases being set up for the operators who control them. Shaheds are launched specifically from a distance. Previously, that distance was about 50 to 70 kilometers last year. Now that distance is constantly, steadily increasing.
It became known back in the summer that the Russians were setting up closed warehouses and manual control points near the airfield. Since then, intelligence has been piecing together the puzzle for a perfect strike. Partisans are a great help in such operations. And the Yellow Ribbon movement consists of underground activists operating in the occupied territories. The Freedom of Russia resistance movement operates within the territory of the aggressor state. By the way, the latter has 12 burned locomotives to its credit. And not only that.
This also includes gathering certain information, tracking specific moments regarding enemy movements, their locations, setting fire to power lines that supply military facilities of the enemy, and other actions involving them which do not allow the enemy to feel at ease.
Whether the partisans had anything to do with the crash of the Russian helicopter in Dagestan is still unknown. Propagandists reported that there were tourists on board. In reality, the victims of this air crash were employees of the Kizlyar electromechanical plant, which, among other things, manufactures launch racks for cruise missiles and bomb release systems for aircraft. There were neither sounds of Russian air defense nor the hum of drones, only these kinds of powerful explosions.
That was a big bang.
This was Ukrainian rocket artillery striking the largest thermal power plant in the Oriel region. This is already the second attack in the last 10 days. Last time it was hit by Neptunes. Here's an interesting detail. Less than a kilometer from this thermal power plant, there is an important Russian defense enterprise called Orel, Tekmash, which manufactures special equipment for the army. Another major target this week, 350 kilometers from Moscow, is the Kostroma State District Power Plant, one of the largest power stations in Russia. It is capable of producing over 3,500 megawatts of electricity. Its smokestack, at over 320 meters tall, is considered one of the highest in Europe. Blackouts were recorded after our attacks on the thermal power plants and in Belgorod and Voronezh. But aside from the thermal power plants, our long reach has also focused on key substations for the Russians.
The main electricity generating enterprises are located precisely in the Moscow military district. And in fact, we want to cut Moscow off in a ring from the rest of the territory of the Russian Federation. Because firstly, half of the brains are concentrated there, as well as a third of all scientific enterprises. That's why cutting off power specifically to these sectors is crucial. This is a very, very high priority target for us.
Drones have damaged key equipment at the Volgograd oil refinery. So, the giant plant, which processes 5% of Russia's total volume, has come to a halt. In addition to that, this week we hit the emergency stop at the Saratov oil refinery and shut down the Kistovo refinery. The Ryazan, Marysky, and Tabashino and Tuapse refineries also face serious problems. We attacked the cargo terminal at the port of Tuapse in Krasnodar Krai for the second time. This is where Putin's shadow fleet is loaded with oil. We struck both the pipeline and the tankers. 4 caught fire, 2 of which were filled to the brim with oil. Drones destroyed its small vessel, the North. The pier and the pipeline were also hit. After the strikes, this key ice-free oil port stopped loading and the aforementioned local refinery halted processing. This week we also struck an important chemical plant for Russia, the Sterlitamak plant, all the way in Bashkortostan, 1,300 kilometers from our border. This facility specializes in irreplaceable products for the Russian army, aviation fuel and synthetic polymers.
Currently, 37% of the Russian Federation's generating and pumping capacities are idle. The fuel shortage is about 20%, and this crisis has affected approximately 67 regions. And Russian soldiers very often attack civilians in these lines. They simply take the fuel for their own needs.
Overall, since the beginning of the war, our defenders have carried out 150 powerful attacks on Russian oil and gas facilities. We strike in swarms, decoy drones, long-range UAVs, drone missiles, and Neptunes with flamingos. This way is more effective, and there's a greater chance of breaking through the stretched Russian air defense, which we are systematically taking out.
There are 2 points of concentration. One is the front line. Air defense systems must not let anything pass this line. The second is Moscow. The Russians' layered defense has already become very, very depleted.
So all these Yars missile tests and talk about the Burevestnik with Oreshnik no longer have any effect on the world. They just infuriate the Russians themselves, who see mythical victories on TV, but out their windows they witness convincing fire shows from Ukrainian Luty, Palyanitsia and Pobrev units. Oksana Radionova, Natalka Kucherenko, TSN Week, 1+1, Marathon, United News.